I once had my good friend Ori from Digital Foundry describe the 90s Brazilian gaming scene as the Wild West of gaming.
What the hell is that?
And I think that's a pretty fair assessment. I mean, I've already covered some of the most insane bits of Brazilian gaming history on this channel. From the Brazilian Nick Arcade to the Brazilian Mega Man, Mortal Kombat 4, and Street Fighter 2 comic book series, which were filled with violence, swearing, lewd scenes, and honestly, just some of the most insane stuff that you can imagine. But now comes the big one. Every time I took a look at one of these insane Brazilian comic book series based on a video game, everyone would always tell me that the Brazilian Street Fighter Alpha 3 comic book series was the good one, the one that I just had to watch. And today, we're finally gonna do it. Of note is that this series actually uses the game's Japanese name, Street Fighter 03, and from what I understand, that was also the name used in the Brazilian arcade cabinets. Additionally, some of the names who worked on this comic book series might be familiar to you, namely Marcel Cassaro, who was a writer for the first Brazilian run of Street Fighter 2, as well as the editor behind the Mortal Kombat 4 comic book series. And you also have 𝓛𝓮𝔀𝓭, who was one of the artists behind the Brazilian Mega Man series, as well as popular international comic book series like Alice in Wonderland and Warcraft Legends. So once again, it's interesting to see how at this point, Brazil basically had a set of industry veterans dedicated to creating comic book adaptations of popular video games. And in fact, this comic launched at roughly the same time frame as the Mortal Kombat 4 and the Brazilian Mega Man comic book series, as it was pretty interesting to see adverts to the Mortal Kombat 4 comic while I was reading Street Fighter Alpha 3. And there were also advertisements for other Brazilian comic book series, some of which definitely seemed to be on the raunchier side. Now, finding the Street Fighter 03 series online is basically impossible. I mean, the others weren't easy either, but I did eventually run into Mortal Kombat 4 and the Street Fighter 2 comic book series, even if it did mean looking for a Reddit comment that directed you to someone else's Google Drive page. But this? No. This is simply not on the internet. Sure, there's information on it and a scan of a page or two here and there, but the full thing? No, that is completely absent. So I did what I do best: bitch about it on Twitter. And lo and behold, the Brazilian fighting game community came true. And before I knew it, I had photos and scans of the comics from multiple people, as well as other people connecting me to folks who might be able to help. So long story short, I'd like to thank 𝓛𝓮𝔀𝓭 and Felipe V. Mendes, as well as Marcel Cassaro, the writer of this series, for answering a few of my questions, and Mestre Rio, whose blog details the story of this comic book series, and who also took the time to create some high-quality scans of the entire run and sent them to me. And in fact, because these comics are so hard to find, I decided to create a burner Google Drive account where I uploaded this series along with the Brazilian Street Fighter 2 and Mortal Kombat 4 comics for everyone to read. If anyone wants to take these and translate them, be my guest. But this also means that now I can finally take a look at the Brazilian Street Fighter 03 comic book series. And the first thing I have to say about it is that the art is actually really good. The Brazilian Mega Man series had a different art style every issue, which ranged from pretty good to downright horrible. The Street Fighter 2 run began with pretty questionable art, but got better as the series went on. And the Mortal Kombat 4 comic was often inconsistent, with amazingly drawn panels often being next to what amounted to little more than stick figures. But this? No! The art in Street Fighter Alpha 3 is consistently great across the board, and I'm beginning to see why 𝓛𝓮𝔀𝓭 is so loved by the Brazilian comic book fan community. The only exception were some backup stories at the end of each issue, which were drawn by different artists, and some of which look a little questionable. But then again, the canonicity of these backups is also a little questionable, so it's not a big deal. Anyway, issue 1 opens up with Guy fighting Birdie, Apparently, he used to be a member of the Mad Gear Gang before it was dismantled by Guy, Cody, and Mike Haggar during the events of Final Fight. And while I admit I'm not up to speed on my Street Fighter and Final Fight lore, I'm pretty sure Birdie was never a part of the Mad Gear Gang, but whatever. Basically, Birdie is going around challenging powerful fighters, hoping that'll get him noticed by other gangs or groups. Though Guy easily takes him down before receiving a phone call from Mike Haggar. Also, shout out to Birdie saying, Street Fighter 1 was never this hard. Mike and Guy reminisce about the old days and how they took out the Mad Gear Gang and saved Jessica, with Guy lamenting the fact that Jessica chose Cody over Guy, which I'm pretty sure Guy was never interested in Jessica, and he knew that she and Cody were already dating before the kidnapping.
Jessica? My sweetheart since childhood. The Mad Gear must pay. She's my friend too. Count me in.
Why the fuck you lying? Why you always lying?
So, Guy was just in it to steal Cody's girlfriend? Dude, you're kind of a shitty friend. Even funnier is the fact that Haggar pretty much responds that Jessica would never be with Guy because she has good taste in men. Anyway, it turns out Rolento recreated the Mad Gear Gang and is now getting support from a major shadow organization. We then skip to a flashback sequence of Ryu and Ken sparring and training under Master 𝓛𝓀𝓭. The Master then summons both and tells them that their training is complete and they must now set out to hone their skills. Ken is ecstatic, but Ryu feels lost, unsure where to go, knowing only that he must now fight powerful fighters to improve himself. We also learn that Master 𝓛𝓀𝓭 lied to them. As it turns out, Akuma was lying in wait, and 𝓛𝓀𝓭 sent away his students to protect them. We now jump to the US, where we find Guile and Charlie sparring. Guile wins the fight, but is surprised to see Charlie learning how to use the Sonic Boom attack. Charlie even states that he never believed Guile's story about how he won his abilities during an accident while flying an experimental jet fighter. Funny thing, the first time I read this, I thought it was a reference to the previous Brazilian Street Fighter 2 comic book series, which had a different publisher. But I asked Marcelo about it, and he told me that this was actually taken from the Street Fighter storytelling game tabletop RPG. Charlie says that he'll be leaving as he's taken on a mission in the Amazon rainforest. As he leaves, Guile has a bad feeling about it and thinks that it's a good idea to have a backup team on standby. We now skip to Thailand, where we see Sagat defeat Adon. After defeating him, Bison appears and invites Sagat to join his Shadaloo organization. But Sagat refuses, saying he has no interest in joining a monster. Finally, we skip to Chun-Li, where we learn she wishes to avenge her father. The comic then ends with a backup story of Rose reading all of the characters and their motivations through a tarot session. And wow, the art style looks really weird. It's like it's trying to copy the main storyline's art style, but the proportions are just so off. It doesn't look bad in close-ups, and some characters look fine, but others look just so disproportioned.
Never let me see you doing that again.
The second issue opens up with Rainbow MIKA, who apparently kidnapped Blanka and forces him to fight for a show that only benefits her. Like, the comic just glosses over this and she's portrayed sympathetically, but this is seriously messed up.
Never let me see you doing that again.
At least it seems Blanka is winning, when suddenly Dan pops up from the crowd and turns out that they were childhood friends, and Dan easily recognizes Blanka despite how much he's changed. And you know what? Good on you, Dan. Just look at how happy Blanka is, something he clearly deserves after literally being kidnapped and forced to fight for someone else's glory. I still can't believe we're just glossing over this. But yeah, these two are already my favorite characters. Rainbow MIKA then cries how the fight isn't over and she needs someone to fight her to keep the show going. But these two Gigachats choose to ignore her instead. But then, suddenly, Zangief pops out of nowhere.
Oh, well, isn't that convenient?
I mean, damn! Was the entire Street Fighter cast just watching this match? Is there like a conjunction here? Are all the planets aligned? Why is the entire Street Fighter cast watching this one match? In person, I might add. Anyway, turns out that Zangief is on a quest to hunt Shadow Liu, and Mika offers to help Zangief if he agrees to fight her for the rest of the match. We now jump to Sakura, who's sparring with Ryu. She lost the fight, and although Ryu acknowledges her skill, he says that he's not interested in being her sensei. But then, it turns out that Ken also just happened to be there, and catches the end of the match.
Oh, well, isn't that convenient?
Ken teases Sakura, and she recognizes him as Ryu's training partner, though she seems unimpressed. Well, turns out that Ken is training Karin, who is Sakura's rival. So it's all just one big coincidence that Ryu and Ken, two friends and rivals, are also training Sakura and Karin, who are also two friends and rivals.
Oh, well, isn't that convenient?
The story now jumps to Italy, where Dhalsim and Rose meet up.
What's a Dhalsim? Oh!
The two apparently have a battle of egos over who's the best magic user. Okay then. Rose grabs Dhalsim and employs her psychic powers to enter Dhalsim's mind, but she's unable to damage him due to his strong mental defenses. Instead, the two become mentally linked, reading each other's minds, thoughts and feelings. So the two stop fighting as they realize the battle was pointless to begin with. Rose, on the other hand, seems a little more taken aback. She's about to state how she might have developed feelings for Dhalsim due to the intimacy of their newfound connection, when they are interrupted by Akuma, who attacks them. Man, everyone just pops out of nowhere in this series. We now jump to Charlie, who's running away from an Amazonian wildfire created by Cammy. Cammy seems to have no personality and behaves like a robot as she chases Charlie. Charlie disarms her, but she quickly defeats him in combat, only to then be saved by Chun-Li, who also pops out of nowhere.
Oh, well, isn't that convenient?
Chun-Li states that Cammy was genetically engineered and brainwashed by Shadow Liu, when suddenly she wakes up, kicks Chun-Li and runs away. Charlie prepares to shoot a sonic boom at her when Chun-Li stops him, saying that she's just a child. Cammy reports to Bison, expecting to be killed for her failure, but Bison spares her, saying that out of all the clone warriors, she's the best one, and too precious to simply discard like that. Instead, he gives her a chance to redeem herself by dispatching his enemies when they inevitably attack, with this rare display of mercy leaving Cammy shedding a tear of relief. We then jump to Guy, who defeated Sodom. Also, nice Darkstalkers reference there. But he's then accosted by Cody, who escaped from prison and seems to have a bone to pick with Guy. The issue then ends with a backup story of Dan, Blanca and Sakura raiding the Shadow Liu base in the Amazon. The story is meant to be humorous, and I'm pretty sure it's not supposed to be canon. They sneak into the base, but find it nearly deserted. Although it is funny when one of the guards asks the other if he's played Darkstalkers. Dan says the base is empty because he warned Shadow Liu ahead of time that they would be raiding it, so he thinks they may have all just run away. Blanca and Sakura are unconvinced. When Balrog then appears out of nowhere, he makes short work of Blanca and Dan, but when Balrog asks if Sakura is just cosplaying as Sailor Moon, she promptly defeats him. The three then leave the base after destroying it. The third issue opens with Cody attacking Guy, accusing him and Haggar of framing him for a crime he did not commit and taking Jessica away. In his mind, Mike is the mayor, so he should have at least known about Cody being in jail, but neither he nor Guy did anything about it. Guy replies that he tried to get away from everything after Jessica chose Cody, that he had no idea Cody was in jail and thought the two were married at this point. Cody realizes neither Guy nor Haggar had anything to do with his arrest, and so the two team up to rescue Jessica from Rolento. You know, I gotta say, this series has been remarkably tame by Brazilian standards. We're 3 issues in, and so far there hasn't been any nudity and breasts, and there we go. Okay, now it's a Brazilian comic. Anyway, we didn't get to see Dhalsim and Rose fight Akuma, but the narration says that Dhalsim teleported himself and Rose to safety. He brought her to India and had her meditate naked to help her heal her mind after facing off against Akuma. Rose then reveals that the chaos in her mind actually stems from her falling in love with Dhalsim, stating that she looked into his soul and liked what he saw, and then kisses him.
Never let me see you doing that again.
I would just like to remind you all that Dalsum is married. Dalsum, being the Giga that he is, tells Rose that if she read into his soul, then she should know that he's married, when suddenly Dalsum's wife walks in. The two then leave Rose alone as she cries from a heartbreak. Dalsum then speaks to his wife and muses who Akuma will seek out next. We then jump to 𝓛𝓮𝔀𝓭, who is in China looking for new challengers before being defeated by Gan. We learn that Gan is an assassin for hire who trained Akuma to be his right-hand man. But once his training was over, Akuma simply chose to go on his way and now seeks to defeat his old master. We then jump back to the Amazonian rainforest where we see Cammy being slashed by Vega and then dumped into the ocean. Wait, I thought she was spared. Am I missing something here? Bison then appears before Charlie and Chun-Li, with Charlie stating how his voice kinda sounds like Sean Connery's. Bison easily defeats Chun-Li, and Charlie is in awe of Bison's power, but he still attacks Bison to try and save Chun-Li, and though he lands a hit, Bison kills off Charlie. And just as Bison prepares to finish off Chun-Li, suddenly, literally everyone appears.
Oh, well, isn't that convenient?
Okay, but seriously, how did they get there? How did they all meet up? Heck, how did a group that big sneak up on Bison? I am so confused. The issue ends with a backstory on how Ken threw a party to celebrate the end of his training, complete with Darkstalker characters and even Captain Ninja, an original comic book creation by Marcel Cassaro. Gotta say though, seeing this kinda makes me wish the team had eventually created a Brazilian Darkstalkers comic, but sadly, no such luck. Anyway, Zangief and Ken are fighting, with Ken feeling that Zangief is taking this friendly spar too seriously. Zangief states that to him, this is a serious fight, as he finds Ken's behavior insulting, especially considering who he trained under. Ken then defeats Zangief with a Fire Shoryuken. And Felicia from Darkstalkers says all she wanted was a break from all the Darkstalker fighting. Oh Felicia, if you only knew how long of a break you're going to get. After defeating Zangief, Rainbow MIKA steps in and says that Ken isn't done experiencing everything the Russian wrestling circuit has in store for him. Wait, I thought MIKA was Japanese. Ken then says that Russian women sure are big, and asks if he can rest there for an hour or two. Eventually, they all become exhausted from fighting, so Ken says that he knows a group that is going into the Amazon to search for Shadaloo, and that he can contact Karin and ask her to take all of them there, to which they all agree with.
Oh, well, isn't that convenient?
Wait, so that's how they got there? Man, that is such a weak plot point. But now, we move on to the final issue, which opens up with Ryu and Sagat fighting in a scene that seemed reminiscent of the Street Fighter animated movie. We then jump to Cody and Guy, who just apparently defeated the entire Mad Gear gang off camera. Wow, that's pretty anticlimactic there. And Rolento is the last one left, who is still holding Jessica hostage. Rolento admits his plan was to turn Guy and Cody against each other. He also tells them how the new Mad Gear gang was financed by Shadaloo, and that he would become a general in Bison's New World Order. Once he ends his speech, an army of clone Julies and Junies appear. Back in the Amazon, our heroes are also fighting against an army of Julies and Junies, as well as Balrog, Vega, and Bison. Cody and Guy defeat the army of Junies and Julies a bit too fast for my liking, before Rolento goes into hiding and sets a trap for them. Just as Cody and Guy are down and about to be defeated, Haggar appears and takes down Rolento. Mike also states that the prison director was being paid off to keep Cody's incarceration a secret, but that he's been handled. And so, the three together defeat Rolento and rescue Jessica, with Jessica falling into Cody's arms yet again. Even Haggar teases Guy over this, telling him it's just like old times again. Back in the Amazon, Ken defeats Balrog, Rose and Dalsum defeat Vega, and Blanca seems to be taking out most of the clone Junies and Julies all by himself. The group then set their eyes on Bison, who unleashes an energy blast against them. But suddenly, Charlie appears piloting a jet airplane, having apparently survived Bison's attack in the previous issue, and fires at him. And with this, Bison appears to disintegrate, though Chun-Li doubts that someone as evil as Bison could be destroyed so easily. In the end though, everyone celebrates their victories, with Dan wondering how did Charlie find an airplane in the first place. Sometime later, we see Chun-Li being summoned into a Special Forces base, where they found Cammy, who is now suffering from amnesia. Chun-Li says she does not recognize her, but recommends that they make her a special agent and that they leave her past alone, signaling the end of the story. Overall, this comic series is a bit uneven, honestly. The art is by far the best out of all the Brazilian comics we've taken a look at so far, mostly due to how consistent it is and how it fits with the Street Fighter games. But many things about the plot honestly bother me. I'll admit I'm not caught up on my Street Fighter Alpha lore, but the Cody Guy and Mike Haggar plotline feels completely superfluous to the plot. You could have removed them altogether and it wouldn't really have impacted the main plotline. And in fact, they don't even get to meet the rest of the Street Fighter cast. Well, I guess Guy meets Birdie in the beginning, but that's about it. Additionally, characters have a habit of always being where the story needs them to be, or just popping out of nowhere. I mean, just what are the chances that Rainbow Mika, Blanca, Zangief and Dan all end up in the same match on the same night? Or that Zangief just randomly decides to go to Ken's party, who then takes them all to Shadow Liu because Ken just so happened to be training a rich girl. I swear, all the planets must have aligned at that point, because what are the odds? And the final climactic battle was a little disappointing. I mean, sure, it happened, but it all feels a little too fast and streamlined. There was barely any tension, and you never really got to see or feel Bison's grip in the criminal world. I mean, what did Bison even do in this plot? He financed the new Mad Gear gang and… that's about it, really. I will say this. The Mortal Kombat 4 comic was not perfect, but it did a better job at keeping things tense, mostly because of how hopelessly outnumbered the good guys were. It also helps that the Mortal Kombat comic already had almost everyone in their respective camp and up to speed on what's happening. Whereas here, I feel too much time was spent on gathering everyone, showing their motivations, and having them learn about Bison and Shadow Liu. I mean, ordinarily this would not be a bad thing. But when you only have 4 issues to tell a story, and you spend so much of it on introductions and logistics, everything else feels a bit rushed. We also have 𝓛𝓮𝔀𝓭, who contribute pretty much nothing to the story. But then again, I suppose that's what happens when you have to juggle so many characters in just 4 issues. Some parts are bound to be ignored or cut out. But still, even though it deviated from the official canon in some parts, it did do a good job at leaving the plot more or less where it should be at the end of Alpha 3, so I suppose I can't really complain too much. Sadly though, this would be the last official video game to comic book adaptation made in Brazil. According to Marcel Cassaro, the Mortal Kombat 4 and Street Fighter 03 comics sold decently well, but nothing amazing. And so, the decision was made to shift gears and focus on their own original runs and creations instead, which is completely understandable. Now, if you want to read this comic, your best bet is checking the Google Drive link in the pinned comment. I'll also go ahead and leave the comics for the Brazilian Mortal Kombat 4 and the Brazilian Street Fighter 2 comic book series. In the end though, this was the final officially licensed video game comic book adaptation created in Brazil. Though there were a few unofficial parodies, and trust me, if you thought the official ones were wild, all I can say is, you haven't seen anything yet. Hey everyone, thank you for watching Stika's Retro Corner. I would also like to thank my newest Patreon supporter, Christopher Jan Bennett. Thank you for helping make the channel better. Anyway, I hope you have a great day. Bye!